The reading is taken from the Old Testament, Numbers, chapter 22, verses 1 to 20, page 160 in the Bibles. The Israelites move into the Promised Land after their journey round Sinai from Egypt. Balak summons Balaam. Then the Israelites travelled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. The Moabites said to the elders of Midian, "This horde is going to lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor near the river, in his native land. Balak said, "A people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people, because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the country. For I know that those you bless are blessed, and those you curse are cursed." The elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. "Spend the night here," Balaam said to them, "and I will bring you back the answer the Lord gives me." So the Moabite princes stayed with him. God said to Balaam and asked, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people that has come out of Egypt covers the face of the land. Now come and put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive them away." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on these people, because they are blessed." The next morning Balaam got up and said to Balak's princes, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So the Moabite princes returned to Balak and said, "Balaam has refused to come with us." Then Balak sent other princes, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said, "This is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely. And do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people for me." But Balaam answered them, "Even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Now stay here tonight as the others did, and I will find out what else the Lord will tell me." That night God came to Balaam and said, "Since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you." Praise the Lord.
Thank you, Anne. Well, previously in the book of Numbers, God's people, the Israelites, have escaped from slavery in Egypt and are travelling towards the promised land of Canaan. When we last met, we saw God bar the Israelites from entering the promised land for their rebellion when they heard the report of 12 spies who checked out the land. Now they're doomed to spend the next 40 years in the desert. And since last week's passage, because we're jumping through Numbers a bit quickly, Korah has rebelled against Moses. His family saw the ground open up underneath them and swallow the whole clan. Lovely scene there. Moses' brother Aaron has died. The people rebelled against God and faced a plague of snakes. Moses held up a bronze snake in the desert to cure the people. That becomes important later on in the Bible. And the Israelites have won famous military victories against the peoples of Sihon and Og. Now, you may well be wondering, why haven't we talked about any of those? Why are we on this weird story of Balaam and Balak? Well, stick with me. We will get there. This is a change of scene. We go into the court of one of Israel's enemies for the first time. The Israelites are camped across the river Jordan from Jericho next to Moab. They're actually in the spot where they're going to go into the promised land when the 40 years have passed, but not yet. So meet Balak, the king of Moab. He's not the most encouraging, brilliant king in the Bible. In fact, he's an idiot, Balak. Let's not mince words. Both he and his people are living in fear of the Israelites. That's quite significant. Verse 4, look down with me if you've got that open. He says, this horde is going to lick up everything around us as an ox licks up the grass of the field. That is what the people are saying to each other. Now, Balak's got a plan. He's got a cunning plan. He has heard of Balaam, a super prophet from Mesopotamia, hundreds of miles away. Balaam is known for his powerful blessings and curses. So Balak sends messengers to this renter prophet to come and curse the Israelites. He sends him with a fee, clearly a set fee. It's obviously on his website or wherever you get this stuff. So he'll be able to come and defeat them by pronouncing a curse on them. What a cunning plan this is. Then in a shock move, when the visitors go, Balaam consults the Lord. Hang on a minute, you may be asking. What's going on here? Because surely it's God's chosen people who consult the Lord. No one told us that there are people outside God's chosen people who are going to go and consult the Lord. Well, apparently not. Apparently this renter prophet knows God as well. He knows him well enough to use his covenant name, the little, you see where you see in the Old Testament Lord written in little capitals. That's God's covenant name, Yahweh, being used. And God says, verse 12, do not go with Balak's men. You must not put a curse on these people because they are blessed. So Balaam sends the servants back, the messengers go back, and they tell Balak the bad news. No curse from this super prophet. But Balak is undeterred. Don't they know who I am, he says. I'm the king of Moab. People don't just say no to me. And he gets his absolute A-list set of princes. Heaven knows who he sent the first time round, but he sends his A-list down. The really great princes to the super prophet Balaam. They promise handsome rewards if he will come and curse the Israelites. But Balaam still says no. Verse 18, even if Balak gave him his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. Well, what a man of principle is the super prophet. We will see about that as the chapter progresses. He comes across quite well here. Will that impression last, I wonder? And then in a shock cliffhanger, because this is the end of part one of two parts. So if you're going on holiday in the next week, you're going to have to catch up on YouTube next weekend when we hear the second part. Shock cliffhanger, God appears to Balaam and says, you know what, you can go with them after all, but only do what I tell you to do. And we are in for a lovely treat next week, one of my favourite stories in the Bible. I did speak about it a few years ago, so you can find that somewhere. There will be a slightly different spin on it next week, I'm sure. Why on earth, then, is this story significant? You may well be asking, why spend time here with this really obscure king and this weird super prophet? And you know, we're on a tour through Numbers. There are other stories that are going to come up again and again in the Bible. We haven't talked about those. Well, the story of the rather hopeless King Balak and the eccentric renter prophet Balaam is significant because it's unexpected. The Israelites think that their enemies in the promised land are huge and terrifying. And remember, that was what we were thinking about last week. The report came back, these are a frightening people, don't go there. But actually, this enemy of Israel is really rubbish. He doesn't think he can defeat the Israelites. In fact, none of the people think that. They're so inspired by their leader. They look out over the Israelites, they're like, no, we're not going to manage here. This is terrible. Oh, don't fancy that at all. He thinks his best hope is a mystical curse from a magic prophet. This is how inspiring are the people of the Promised Land. Balaam is also quite a surprising figure, because we've been told that God has been quite careful to pick out his chosen people, the Israelites, to be his representatives on earth. So what on earth is God doing speaking to this Gentile, this weird Gentile at that? He doesn't fit into what we know about God's plan for his people. Well, we've got 3 brief thoughts this morning from this passage. The first thought then is God uses unexpected people. I'm hoping there is going to be a slide with this on it in case you can't hear me speaking. God uses unexpected people. Balaam is not at all what you'd expect from a prophet of the Lord. And of course, he's in really good company in the Bible. God quite often raises somebody you wouldn't expect to do something quite big. When the Israelites are finally ready to go into the Promised Land, and when we get there in the story, we will encounter the story of Rahab. They go into Jericho. They are aided and abetted by Rahab. She is a local prostitute. She ends up being adopted by the Israelites as one of their own because she's so helpful. You wouldn't expect a prostitute to become a key person in God's plan. Hundreds of years later, Jesus is taking a walk through that same town of Jericho, and there up a tree is the little tax collector, Zacchaeus, a very little man, and if you know the song, a very little man was he. He was a swindler. He got rich from overcharging his own people on behalf of the hated Roman occupiers. So he wasn't very popular. But rather than condemn Zacchaeus, when Jesus looked up in the tree, he invited himself round for supper. Friends, if you're going to invite yourself round for supper, invite yourself to a rich person's house. It's going to be a much better affair than if you go somewhere poor. But so you wouldn't expect a swindler to become a key person in God's plan. Almost any Christian, if you mention the name Zacchaeus, they know the story. We remember him 2,000 years after his life. And there are I could give you loads of other examples. We could be here all day with people who are unexpected, who end up in God's kingdom. The man who was possessed by a whole legion of demons. The Samaritan woman who had such a shameful life that she could only go out in the heat of the day to get water, and Jesus meets her at the well. You know, it turns out that actually the people who put the limits on who's acceptable to God are not God. God doesn't do that. It's God's people who often put limits on who's acceptable to God. God often throws the net rather wider than we are comfortable with. To the people who maybe at first glance, maybe they just genuinely are morally dubious, unacceptable, people we feel really uncomfortable with. The murderer, Moses, is the leader of the people at this moment, isn't he? And the greatest king of Israel was the adulterer and the murderer, David. Or what about the hate preacher, Saul, who becomes the guy who is instrumental in founding the church, as Paul? So God uses unexpected people. You don't have to be particularly holy for God to use you. You don't have to be particularly religious. You don't have to be religious at all. You don't have to believe a particular set of things. You don't have to tick all the boxes off. God can use you even if your life is really messy. The big thing he is looking for all of you, if you hear me say nothing else this morning, here is my point. The big thing he is looking for is for you to say yes to God. Just open your hands, recognize that you come with nothing and you have nothing to offer except yourself, and say yes to God. And he will use you when you do that. Say yes to choosing God's way over your way, even when that seems really odd. Say yes to following Jesus, even when it costs you. What will he use you for, you may be wondering? Well, he'll use you to reach other people, those people around you who don't yet know Jesus. You have a unique connection to other people. It's a bit like, so on your phone, if you've got a smartphone, most of you probably have, you have a unique set of apps on your phone. Nobody in the world has the exact same apps as you, right? So you've got a unique set of connections to other people. Nobody has the same family, friend, work, whatever connections that you have. Your friends, work colleagues, family, people you share a hobby with, whatever. Or you may be one of those rare people who is just really gifted at talking to people who you've never met. I know a few of them. A few of you are very special people who are very good at talking to people. There was a couple in my church when I was a curate who came to church. They became Christian because a lady called Nancy got chatting to them in the supermarket checkout queue. Some people are just great at that, aren't they? If I start doing that, it's absolutely excruciating. It's awful. I'm terrible at that. But some people are just absolutely natural. Robert in my last church, who's a clergyman, he walks every day and he's out with the dog walkers and he just chats to people and the conversation just very naturally gets around to Jesus. And it's just so easy. But I want to encourage the majority of you who are not like that. We don't all have to be Roberts or Nancys. We just need to be, a friendly face, offering joy, hope, and community to those around you. With those friends or family members or people who you're with for a long time in your life, colleagues, whatever, stick around because they may be not interested for a really long time, but then something might happen in their life and they'll suddenly be interested. And things will click into place and they know you're a Christian and wow, you're someone who's got a few answers that they didn't have. God can use you to do his work, even when that is simple things, being kind, spreading the kingdom, being the person who actually has some idea what to say when someone's been diagnosed with a really frightening disease. Doing something particularly big for someone, showing radical generosity out of nowhere in a situation. But also it can be big things, but it can be really little things as well. Being alongside people in difficult times, being the person who doesn't forget that someone was bereaved 6 months ago, a year ago. That's when people forget, friends. If you remember that first anniversary, you are a very special friend indeed. Responding to a particular crisis, turning up with a casserole when people are just in a state. He will do this. God will do amazing things when you are just available to him. When you come to him with open hands, you offer yourself in his service. God uses unexpected people. Now, you are not unexpected people. You are here in church on a Sunday morning. It is not compulsory to be here. There is a wide range of things you could be doing this morning, and you are here. God can use you. Please be sure, friends. That's our first point. The two, you'll be pleased to know, the two others are briefer. God is at work. Here is our second thought. And God is at work even when you can't see him, especially when you can't see him. We don't know. The wonderful thing about this story, or one of the many wonderful things about this story, I have no idea how this story ended up in the Bible. Because if you read, you can read all the way through the story of Balak and Balaam. They don't actually ever encounter God's people. I don't know who wrote Numbers. Traditionally, it's thought to have been Moses. How on earth did he know this story? I have no idea. We just see God at work, through a really unexpected and flawed person, Balaam, in pronouncing blessings and not curses on God's people. And so God is at work in this story. Christians need to know this, because left to our own devices, Christians often think it all depends on me, this work. You know, I'm the only person that Christian that person knows who's a friend. So I have to stay in this job, or I have to stay in this place because they don't know any other person. And if I don't commit to that ministry, you know, I'm the only person who is doing this. So if it's not me, it's not going to happen. Well, do you know what, friends? In fact, and I have to teach myself this the whole time, because I'm paid to do God's work. God's work does not depend on you. It does not depend on me. It depends on who? It depends on him, doesn't it? It's God's work, not mine. It's not yours. It is his. And God is at work, and often in ways that you don't see, often in ways that you wouldn't expect. You know, when I was first working in a church, I was working partly in youth work. That was part of my job. And we had a really big and brilliant youth group. And if any of those ever watch any of these sermons, hello to you wonderful people. It was a wonderful moment in that church's life. There are great people. There's a Mercury Award winner in there somewhere. There are various church leaders. They are doing amazing things right now. But I remember we were very focused on a group of young people who were coming to things, and we were working with them. We had small groups, we had mentoring. And then we realized that actually God had been doing an amazing work in someone we hadn't even noticed, who'd just been sitting quietly at the back and listening, and we'd never even spotted him. And I have lost count in my life and my ministry of the number of times God's done that, where I'm really focused on doing something over here, and actually he's really at work over here, and suddenly you spot what he's doing. That's not, he doesn't want you to stop working over here. He's delighted that you're working over here. It just happens that he's been working over here as well, and suddenly you spot it. So pray for God's work. Definitely pray for it where you can see it, and keep in step with the Holy Spirit when he wants to show you something that he's been doing that you haven't seen yet. Because God is going to surprise you. It's like, wow, God, what's he been doing over there? I can't believe it. And don't ever, and I'd say this to faithful people, because I understand the frustrations for some of you. Some of you have been praying for friends and family members for literally decades, and you haven't seen God respond. Keep going. Keep praying for those situations where you think God isn't doing anything, because he will, given his timing, given not your timing. God is at work. Be sure, friends. And then our last thought, God is in charge. This is sort of similar but different. And you know, we've wondered this morning why this story is in Numbers, and ultimately we don't really know. We can suggest some reasons. But it points us to the truth of God's promises to the Israelites, that he will bring them into the promised land. You know, don't worry about those awful people over in the promised land. I am going to overcome them. Some of them are led by absolute idiots. So they are scared of you. They're more scared of you than you are of them, a bit like the little spiders in the corner of your house. You know, here are Gentiles who recognize God's power, who recognize what God's plan is, even though they definitely don't like it. You know, those people are coming over here and they are killing us. We don't like that thought. The story points us to God's bigger purpose and the fact that he is working it out in his own time and in his own way. You know, God is taking his people into the promised land, whether they like it or not. The people there certainly don't like it, because they're going to be annihilated, and more on that in the future. God is in charge. And we see, if you read through the whole of Numbers, and it's a good book to read through. It can be a bit hard work when you get to the long list. It's called Numbers because there are very long censuses of all the people. And so you can sort of read through those a bit more quickly. But God is a pretty uncompromising figure in the book of Numbers. If you're a bit worried about the God of the Old Testament, Numbers is definitely where you find him. Because at a moment where the Israelites need a strong lead and something very definite, he acts in very rapid and very decisive judgment when they rebel. Hot on the heels of being barred from the promised land, a rebellious clan is swallowed up by the ground. You're not going to forget that what you were doing that day. Another rebellion has a plague of snakes which start biting people and they start dying. Again, you won't forget that day. Now, we live in a different age and God relates to us quite differently, but we would do well to still recognize God's sovereignty in every area of our lives. You know, don't try and parcel off bits of your life from God. So, you know, this is my Sunday, which is this shape and where I do the God stuff. This is the bit of my life which is my work, and this is the bit of my life where I do this. And before you know, if your life isn't integrated across, what's going to happen? That's the opposite of integration, is disintegration, isn't it? The reason why, if you know anybody in your life who's ever had an affair, who's been unfaithful in their marriage, often their life starts to fall apart when it comes out, doesn't it? And that's because their personality is disintegrating because they have not had integrity. They've lied to their partner, they've lied to the people around them. And they lack that integrity, and so they start to disintegrate. That is disintegration. We try, you know, none of us can be people of complete integrity because we're sinful people. Don't try and parcel off bits of your life from God. God is in charge. And actually, it's not only here where we see God acting in judgment. What happened to Ananias and Sapphira, those two people who sold their house or sold a bit of land and gave their money to the church, seeming all lovely and generous, but kept a nice big bit for themselves? They drop down dead when they're faced with the truth of that. Bring every part of your life under God's control, friends, because God is in charge of it, whether you like it or not. Your personal life, your job choices, your money, the things for which you're responsible, your family, your people. Recognize that God has the first call on your life. What about school choices? You know, it's a surprise. I talk to other ministers about this. I'm surprised how few people ever talk to me about choices of schools for their children. It's really interesting, isn't it? A difficult choice, an important choice, a choice that it's important that you pray about. If your whole life points to the fact that God is in charge of it, you will be doing well. You know, just a little tip for this. As part of your prayers, if you pray in the morning, I think it's really helpful to pray first thing in the morning. Pray for your day and just look at your diary if you've got one. Think about what you're going to be doing that day and pray through that day and what it's going to look like and who you might meet, who you know you're going to meet, who you're going to see. God is in charge of all of that. And God cares about the details in your life, not just the big picture. So, friends, where have we been this morning? The kingdom of God is a very big and a very inclusive place. Jesus never turned anyone away. There's a great song. If you've never heard it, you've got a treat on YouTube later. Jesus never, ever, ever, ever turned anyone away. He counted among his friends some pretty unexpected and some pretty unsavory people. Now, this morning and this week, you may need to enlarge your view of who belongs with Jesus and how he can use them. And if you think you're beyond the pale, and I guess in any group of people, there will be some people who just think God can't possibly want me, he can't possibly use you. Be very sure that you're not. I would say, oh yes, he can, and he will, if you give him the chance. Jesus died in your place so that you can be right with God, and he did that so that you can be put on on a hard rock place instead of the sand that you're sinking in. Just like those adulterers and those murderers, God has a purpose for you. Now we're going to spend a bit of time praying into all of this, and I am hoping we have some little prayers. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some prayer ministry time, and how we do this normally in our services is that we're going to have our prayer team just up at the back. They have a little set prayer that they would love to pray over you that comes out of what we've been talking about. If you would like just God's help through his Holy Spirit to do all of this, to have God in charge of your life, to have God at work in you, to be used, seeing the unexpected in your life, then do come and pray with somebody this morning, have somebody pray over you. If you're part of our prayer ministry team, do come up to the back and get someone to pray for you first. We'll pray for each other first, and then we'll pray for everybody else. There'll be some music and the chance just to pray and reflect. As you're praying, if you're listening to God and you feel like God is saying something to you to share with other people, then do come and share that with myself or with Sarah, and we will share that if that's appropriate. So, shall we pray? And then we'll have this time of ministry.